Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving into something a little bit different, something, well, a lot of you have requested, actually. We're going to be looking at the history of sex toys.
It's a fascinating topic and one that I think has a lot of relevance to, the modern world and modern sexuality.
Yeah, and, it's something that is obviously a little bit taboo to talk about, but I think it's really important that we do, because it's a part of human history and a part of human sexuality that has been around for a very long time.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, when we look at the history of sex toys, we can really see how our attitudes towards sex and sexuality have changed over time.
Definitely. So, uh, where do we even begin with this? I mean, we're talking about something that goes back thousands and thousands of years.
That's right. The earliest evidence we have of sex toys dates back to the Neanderthal period, around 29,000 BC. So, I mean, we're going way, way back.
29,000 BC. Wow. Okay, so what did they look like back then?
Well, they were pretty basic. They were made of things like stone, wood, and bone.
So not exactly the sophisticated vibrators and dildos we see today.
No, not quite. But, even though they were simple, they still serve the same purpose. I mean, people have been looking for ways to enhance their sexual pleasure for a very long time.
Right. That's a good point. So we don't know for sure exactly what they used these early sex toys for, right?
Sure.
I mean, it could have been for pleasure, but also maybe for some kind of fertility ritual or something like
Not
that.
exactly. I mean, there's really no way to know for sure. But it's interesting to think about all the different possibilities.
It is. It really makes you realize how, like, this urge, this desire, it's such a fundamental part of the human experience,
Yeah.
that it goes back that far.
Right. Like it's something that's been with us since the very beginning.
So let's move on from the Neanderthals. Let's jump ahead a few thousand years. What happens in ancient Greece, for example?
Well, the ancient Greeks were, as you know, very open about their sexuality. And this is reflected in their sex toys.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
how are they different from what the Neanderthals were using?
Well, for one thing, they were a lot more elaborate. The Greeks started using materials like brass and leather, and they even shaped some of their sex toys to look like genitalia.
Interesting. So they were like actually trying to create realistic representations of body parts.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely interested in realism. And they also, they really embraced pleasure and they weren't afraid to experiment. And actually, what's funny? They even used hardened bread as dildos sometimes.
Hardened bread. Seriously.
It's true. It's called Allah's Bopalix. But, as you can imagine, that wasn't exactly the safest material to be using.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very hygienic.
No, not at all. I mean, bread is incredibly porous, so it can harbor all sorts of bacteria and viruses.
Okay, so not a practice to try at home.
Definitely not. But at least they used olive oil as a lubricant.
Okay, so at least there's that. So they had some sense of how to make things a bit more comfortable, even if the materials themselves weren't always ideal.
Right, exactly.
So let's keep moving along this historical timeline. Where do we go next?
Well, let's head over to ancient China, around 1300 AD.
Okay, 1300 AD in China. What's happening there in the world of sex toys?
Well, they were pretty innovative in ancient China. For example, they actually invented the cock ring.
Really? Cochranes go that far back?
Oh, yeah. They figured out that, if you restrict the blood flow at the base of the penis, you can prolong an erection. It's a pretty simple concept, but it's been effective for centuries.
Huh. Well, there you go. You've learned something new every day.
Yeah.
What else were they using back then?
They also had double-sided dildos, which were basically long, thin pieces of wood or metal with two pointed ends.
Double-sided. Okay, I'm trying to picture how that would be used.
Yeah, me too. And what's really interesting is that in China, they often made sex toys out of jade.
Jade. Why jade?
Well, jade was a really valuable material in ancient China. It was believed to have all sorts of magical properties. People thought it could ward off evil spirits, cure illnesses, and bring good luck.
So they believed that using jade for these personal items would somehow imbue them with special properties.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the physical sensation, but also about the spiritual aspect.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought about it that way. Okay, now we have to talk about Victorian England. I mean, that's the era we often associate with being really repressed, sexually repressed.
Right, but like all things, it's a bit more complicated than that because, when you repress something, it doesn't just go away. It often finds a way to express itself in other ways.
So what was happening with sex toys in Victorian England? Were people even using them?
Oh, they were definitely using them. In fact, the vibrator was actually invented during the Victorian era.
Really? I always thought that was a more modern invention.
Nope, it goes all the way back to the 1800s.
Wow, so what was the story there? I mean, how did the vibrator come about?
Well, the popular story is that it was invented to treat hysteria in women.
Hysteria. Okay, remind me, what exactly was hysteria again?
It was basically a catch-all term for a whole bunch of different symptoms in women, things like anxiety, irritability, fatigue, and even sexual desire. And, back then they believed that hysteria was caused by a wandering womb.
A wandering womb.
Oh, wow. So the treatment for hysteria was often something called a pelvic massage, which basically involved doctors manually stimulating a woman's clitoris.
Doctors manually stimulating.
Oh.
Okay, wow. Um, that sounds very hands-on, to say the least.
Yeah, it was. And it was also very time consuming. So some doctors started looking for a more efficient way to do it. And that's how the vibrator was born.
So the vibrator was initially seen as a medical device.
That's how the story goes. But, a lot of historians now believe that that's just a myth. There's not actually a lot of evidence to suggest that vibrators were widely used to treat hysteria. It seems more likely that they were, always intended for pleasure.
Ah, so just market it as a medical device to make it more acceptable.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many other things in history were like that.
Right. I mean, people have always been looking for ways to enjoy themselves, but they haven't always been able to be open about it.
That's true. Okay, so let's bring it into the present day.
Mm.
What about the 20th and 21st centuries? What's been happening with sex toys in the modern era?
Well, the 20th century saw sex toys slowly become a bit more mainstream. They were still pretty taboo, but you started to see them being marketed as marital aids and things like that.
And now, it seems like we're living in a golden age of sex toys.
We are. In the 21st century, the sex toy industry has just exploded. There's so much variety and innovation now. It's incredible. And, this is due to a few different factors.
Like what?
Well, I think a big part of it is that we're just more open about sex and sexuality now than we ever have been before. The sex positive movement has really helped to destigmatize these conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense. As people become more comfortable talking about sex, they also become more comfortable exploring it in different ways.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the internet. The internet has made it so much easier for people to buy sex toys discreetly and anonymously.
No more awkward trips to the adult store.
Exactly. And the technology itself has come a long way too. Now we have vibrators with multiple speeds and settings, clitoral stimulators, app-controlled toys, and even teledildonics.
Teledildonics, what even is that?
Oh, it's wild. It's basically technology that allows you to control a sex toy remotely, like through your phone or computer. So you could be in one place and your partner could be somewhere else entirely, and you can still, be intimate with each other.
Oh, wow. So the future of sex toys is looking pretty high-tech.
It is. And, I think it's only going to get more innovative from here. We're already seeing things like virtual reality sex toys and sex robots starting to emerge.
From stone and wood to virtual reality and robots, that's quite a journey.
It is. And I think it really speaks to the fact that no matter how much technology advances, we're always going to be looking for ways to connect with each other physically and emotionally.
That's a great point. And, I think it's really important to remember that there's no shame in exploring your sexuality, however you choose to do that.
I agree. Whether you use sex toys or not, it's all about what feels good for you and your partner.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway here is that sex toys have been a part of human history for a very long time, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
And I think, as we move forward, it'll be interesting to see how technology continues to shape the way we experience pleasure and intimacy.
It definitely will. So listeners, what do you think? Have your views on sex toys changed at all after learning about their long and fascinating history? Let us know.
Yeah.
And until next time, keep exploring.